Thank you for watching. Subtitle MK. He will not lose his life. The film begins with the story of a young girl named Cairo, living in Tennessee. With her parents working abroad, Cairo remains alone at home. To cope with her loneliness, she turns to her passion for writing and travels through the forest path to school each day. At school, Cairo's path crosses with her literature teacher, Jonathan Miller. Jonathan is a middle-aged man whose dreams of becoming a writer have fallen through. Due to the age difference, Jonathan tries to be a father figure for Cairo, while Cairo starts to develop a special interest in him. One day, Cairo arrives early to class, and Jonathan gives her a list of books they will read throughout the term. Jonathan is surprised that Cairo has already read all these books. A conversation about literature starts between the two. Meanwhile, Cairo's friend Vinny, who is taking Jonathan's class for the second time, comes and invites Cairo to lunch. After the girls leave, Jonathan, curious about Cairo's reading taste, examines the books on his desk. Suddenly, his friend Boris arrives. He grabs the book from Jonathan's hand and begins to mockingly read aloud a vulgar section. Jonathan tries to stop Boris from reading the vulgar section, but Boris doesn't listen to him. Boris sees a book that Jonathan wrote, and Jonathan is surprised to learn that Cairo has his book. When Jonathan comes home, he finds his wife Beatrice engrossed in the computer. He tries to talk to her, but she seems too busy to speak. Jonathan tries to share the excitement of one of his students reading his book. While they are talking, Beatrice's colleague Amy calls. After the call, Jonathan flirts with his wife, and they have a drink together. The atmosphere between them starts to heat up. But just as they are about to get closer, Amy calls again and disappoints Jonathan. The next day, Jonathan tells Boris about his disappointing weekend. How Amy's call ruined the romantic moment he was going to have with Beatrice, complains. While Boris teases Jonathan about his misfortune, he talks about his own life. As they chat, they see Cairo emerging from the nearby forest. Jonathan looks at Cairo with the uneasiness of the previous day. Unaware of the situation, Cairo removes his headphones and greets them warmly. Jonathan, experiencing sexual frustration, tries to appear calm by starting a relaxed conversation with Cairo. Meanwhile, Winnie says she accidentally dropped her belongings in the changing room. Observing the situation, Cairo tells Winnie that she is quite brave. While trying to find ideas for the composition, Cairo finds Winnie's suggestions ordinary. Winnie finally suggests to Cairo to write about their teacher, Janet. Cairo is surprised and says it would be weird because of the age difference between them. Winnie, in a flirting manner, tries to convince Cairo that it wouldn't be a problem. She implies that Janet is a kind and gentle person, and thus could be ideal for Cairo's first experience. Although Cairo is initially hesitant, Winnie's persistence piques his interest. Winnie, she continues to provoke Cairo by saying that Janet looks at him with longing. These words cause Cairo to feel both embarrassed and excited. As time progresses, Cairo's interest in sexuality begins to increase. This desire intensifies, and Cairo yearns to fully experience these feelings. In class, her eyes frequently look for Janet, and she starts to show her attraction towards her. One day, Jonathan quietly approaches Cairo and says he wants to meet in his office after class. Later, while Jonathan is chatting with Boris in his office, he invites him and his wife to dinner. Boris accepts the invitation, and before leaving, they have fun dancing. Cairo sees Jonathan dancing. After Boris leaves, Jonathan tries to imitate his friend's dance moves. The situation makes both of them laugh. Then, they start talking about Winnie. Jonathan states that he approves of Cairo and Winnie's friendship, and the conversation continues about Cairo's living conditions. Jonathan congratulates Cairo for the outstanding success in his last article. Cairo's ability to recite some sections from memory impresses Jonathan greatly. Appreciating his student's talent, Jonathan assigns him the task of writing a short story in the style of his favorite author. If he successfully completes this task, he says he will pass the whole term. Cairo sees this as a great opportunity and eagerly accepts. Then Cairo surprises Jonathan by revealing that he has read his books. Just as Jonathan quoted from Cairo's writing, Cairo also reads a section from Jonathan's book. Jonathan is very happy, and that the quoted book is his first work.
Jonathan is very happy and admits that the quoted book was his first work, which makes it particularly meaningful to him. Jonathan explains that he hasn't written anything in a long time, saying that after getting married, his life became ordinary, and he couldn't find inspiration for a new book. Cairo, however, doesn't believe it's just a lack of inspiration and challenges Jonathan, encouraging him to rediscover his old passion for writing. Jonathan invites Cairo to meet over the weekend to discuss the short story in more detail. At the meeting place, Jonathan surprises Cairo by approaching him from behind. While they chat, Jonathan talks about how they've recently been developing their literary skills together. Meanwhile, as a poet performs nearby, Cairo glances at Jonathan, who is listening attentively. Later, Elliot critiques the poem and they exchange ideas. While Cairo smokes a cigarette, he offers one to Jonathan, who accepts it. On a new school day, Cairo decides to change his appearance. Boris and Jonathan bring him coffee, and together they joke with more confidence, sharing a cigarette. Although Vinny hasn't commented on Cairo's new look, Cairo confidently says he's sure Vinny likes it. Afterward, Cairo explains to Jonathan that he wants to write his story in the style of Henry Miller, a writer famous for works centered on love and sexuality. Jonathan worries that this could cause issues at school, but Cairo believes it will make the story more interesting. After some thought, Jonathan trusts Cairo and allows him to proceed with his plan. Later, Jonathan's phone rings, a message from his wife inviting him for a getaway over the weekend. During this time, Cairo approaches Jonathan to discuss his short story. However, Jonathan's mind is preoccupied with thoughts of his wife, so he hastily approves Cairo's writing without much consideration. Left alone, Vinny and his friend start joking about Cairo's behavior. Vinny mocks Cairo, implying he's trying to seduce the professor, and mimics his exaggerated gestures to amuse their friends. Meanwhile, Cairo frantically searches for his missing phone, while Jonathan is repeatedly interrupted by Amy's persistent calls. Suddenly, Jonathan's phone rings, and he's surprised to hear Cairo's voice on the other end. It turns out Cairo accidentally placed his phone in Jonathan's bag. During their conversation, Jonathan's wife expresses her disappointment about their postponed weekend plans. Feeling guilty, Jonathan offers to return Cairo's phone and immediately sets out, despite the rain. On his way, a sudden downpour starts. When Jonathan finally reaches Cairo's house, he sees Cairo walking in the rain, wearing a captivating dress, leaving him momentarily stunned. When their eyes meet, a strong attraction sparks between them. Under the heavy rain, they move toward each other passionately, embrace, and share a fiery kiss. The intensity of the moment leaves Jonathan and Cairo feeling as though they are in a dream. With Jonathan's mind completely occupied by Cairo, he is suddenly brought back to reality when Cairo sends him his final exam results. Meanwhile, Jonathan's wife asks him to leave her alone, stating she's busy with her own work. Jonathan then retreats to a small house nearby. There, he prints out Cairo's completed work and immediately begins reading it. The captivating story, with its adult themes, draws Jonathan in, and as he imagines Cairo in the scenes of the story, his excitement and desire grow. The next day, Cairo arrives at class wearing a striking outfit, but Jonathan's attitude toward him has noticeably changed. He no longer treats Cairo as warmly as before, his behavior distant and odd. Noticing the shift, Cairo asks Jonathan about the situation. Jonathan admits he is disappointed by the explicit content in Cairo's writing. Although Cairo tries to explain, Jonathan refuses to listen. Eventually, Jonathan decides to end both the relationship and the writing. He criticizes Cairo's work and expresses regret for ever trusting him. Cairo attempts to explain his true feelings, but Jonathan's rejection only fuels his anger. Cairo lashes out at Jonathan, calling his work dull and boring, and increasingly frustrated, challenges Jonathan to give him a lower grade. Jonathan is determined to maintain the teacher-student relationship and accuses Cairo of acting out of jealousy. After this tense moment, Cairo storms out of the classroom and leaves his story in a school administrator's mailbox. Jonathan returns home and shares the difficult day with his wife, recounting his encounter with Cairo and the details of the story. His wife begins to take an interest in Cairo's writing, and a heated argument, unintentionally involving Boris, breaks out between the couple. Meanwhile, after being rejected by Jonathan, Cairo goes to a bar with his friend Vinny. Over drinks, they vent their frustrations. As the night progresses and their glasses empty, they come up with a playful idea to provoke Boris. They decide to take provocative photos and send them to him. Jonathan receives a call from the principal, accusing him of having an inappropriate relationship with Cairo. Jonathan denies the accusations and reassures Beatrice that they are baseless. Beatrice warns Jonathan that if the allegations turn out to be true, he will lose both his job and his marriage. She cautions him about the potential consequences. The next day, Cairo skips class due to a meeting with the principal, while Jonathan continues teaching. However, Cairo's absence visibly unsettles him. After class, Vinny approaches Jonathan and explains how much Cairo means to him. Although Vinny tries to make Jonathan feel guilty, Jonathan ignores these efforts and avoids engaging in any argument. As Cairo's plans begin to unravel, the school administration calls Jonathan to a meeting. Cairo and Professor Miller undergo a detailed interrogation, with questions being asked about their interactions in class and whether they've had any closeness outside of school. Cairo's answers strongly imply that there is a connection between them. This situation leads the professor to worry about his professional future and reputation. Cairo's statements put Jonathan in a very difficult position. When the principal sees that there are no changes in Cairo's statements, Jonathan decides to suspend him from his duties. After the meeting, Boris approaches Jonathan, expressing his disappointment and advising him to be cautious, not to make the situation worse. After delivering his message, Boris leaves Jonathan alone to give him some time to think. When Jonathan returns home, he reluctantly tells Beatrice that he has been suspended. Beatrice immediately asks if anything happened, but Jonathan denies it, only admitting that he's been giving special attention to Cairo. Beatrice doesn't believe him and continues to ask questions until Jonathan confesses the truth. When Beatrice asks Jonathan if he has any feelings for Cairo, Jonathan hesitates and can't deny it. This confession leads to a heated argument, and they exchange hurtful words. Furious, Beatrice screams that she wants a divorce and leaves the house. Meanwhile, Vinny talks to Cairo about his behavior and warns him about the potential consequences, including that it might cause Jonathan to lose his job. Cairo, however, doesn't care about these concerns. In fact, he sees this as his greatest achievement and incorporates it into his university composition. Cairo explains to Vinny that he didn't think Jonathan had a high opinion of him, which is why he took revenge in this way. Cairo's essay vividly depicts the potential consequences of his relationship with Jonathan. When he finishes the writing, the film ends. Subscribe for more.